Big headlines. This is a shocker. How 9 billion shillings just walked out of NYS. No one expected this this morning. Of course, there's some very interesting headlines. Why firms find diploma holders more attractive. And this is a revelation because, of course, there's been that awakening of universities over the last 5 to 10 years or so, when more and more universities receive charters, and there are now more degree holders in Kenya, but apparently the diploma holders are still more marketable. Ruto, the isolated man in push for referendum, of course that's the biggest political story. We'll be getting to that in a short while, but of course let's start with the big one. How 9 billion shillings just walked out of NYS. Now this comes barely, it's just a matter of months since that scandal where it was said that about 790 million shillings was lost. Of course, there was talk that the amount could have been much bigger. But months later, then something like this happens because, yes, of course, according to the youth PS, it says the spy master has grossly exaggerated this figure because this is coming from NIS, the National Intelligence Service. And of course, any information coming from there has to have some credibility. Whether or not the PS denies this, wherever there's smoke, there must be fire. 9 billion shillings just walked out of NYS. Did you expect it to come from NYS?
I think what I would say is that there is a way in which we still need to get a little more emphatic about how those who engage in practices that are not seen to be straight are handled. I would say that I'm not very surprised, because I think that despite the fact that we have very clear instruments that are intended to bring to book those who commit offenses or those who engage in irregularities, there seems to be some sense of tolerance, and I think increasingly people are getting smarter at how it is that they can actually beat the law and get onto this. I think this is really a wake-up call that we need to get a lot more serious.
What kind of impunity and audacity is this, coming only months after the same institution was in the spotlight over something similar?
Yeah, first of all, is the structures we have from the DPP's office, the prosecution office, the investigative officers, where complaints are laid, and then investigation takes on, and one is charged in a court of law. Because if you go before a court of law and you don't have sufficient evidence, then you expect that particular person to be acquitted. And if they are acquitted, you expect them to sue the government for having been wrongly prosecuted. So it's something we now need to be more careful with, and to make sure that when you have allegations of this nature, the information is accurate, and the impunity is amazing. Part of it is, the way we do our prosecution. If someone had gone to jail over stealing public funds, and seriously so, then people will fear or will be scared. But this goes to the moral, the people running our institution and their morality. And where did the rain start beating us? We need now to train from very early age, even in schools, against corruption. In families, if you are a father of children and they know you are enjoying monies of corruption from government, even when those children grow up, will still be corrupt. So it's a value, system we have, so that we value our country, we protect our country, and even before doing prosecution, the government should be able to deal with this and deal with such persons. Yes. But who has the courage to deal?
Who has the courage? That's a big question. Allow me to just paint a quick picture for our viewers who may not have gone through the Daily. This is on the Daily Nation. The story is also on the Standard. I've seen it. Corrupt NYS officials set up dummy companies, forged tender documents, and exploited vulnerabilities in public finance computers, popularly known as IFMIS. Now, under investigations, investigators have narrowed down on 36 companies which claim to have supplied NYS with various goods, among them quite a number there, and were paid. And for supplying air, according to this story, they say they supplied air, meaning they supplied nothing. This is the biggest incident of payment for air to come to light since the Anglo-leasing scandals of 2005. Of course, it comes in the wake of that increased budgetary allocation to the NYS. Previously, it only had 2.5 billion. Now it has 25 billion shillings annually because of the kind of plans that the president has. But coming back to this issue of about what happens when you're even investigated for alleged corruption, because it appears there's no deterrent to future fraudsters. We saw what happened at the NYS, and you're both members of the National Assembly. The Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee back then made a big spectacle of that investigation. We remember very many people appearing before the PAC of the National Assembly in the 11th Parliament, and all that investigation ended up with nothing. No one was convicted, as you said. No one was even censured, for that matter. Don't you think that that kind of process without consequence from a place no less as the National Assembly actually just gives people more confidence to actually pursue these things, knowing that whatever happens, we'll just walk scot-free?
Yes, I think that the challenge really is that we have come to a point where the impunity is not only rewarded, but the institutions are not functioning effectively.
Including the National Assembly.
When I talk about institutions, then we really are thinking largely about the legislature, the judiciary, the executive, which really means, therefore, that there is a sense in which we have to ask ourselves that to what extent, in terms of our current structural arrangements, our governance initiatives, and much more importantly, the manner in which the public, because whatever happens, I know as my colleague Mheshimiwa indicated, there is a sense in which you would want to look at the courts and look at the way in which the law can be seen to provide justice. But I am a strong believer that if we were able to give the civic society, the public, greater information and give them a sense that their voice counts, then they would be much better as watchdogs and those who would be able to hold, particularly, say, the National Assembly accountable, that as the National Assembly seeks to perform its role, they would know that they are representing members, yes, and that these members would turn around and ask them the questions. So I would say that perhaps what we need to keep going back to is to look at the way in which we can make these institutions function, whether or not we are talking about the National Assembly or we are talking about the offices, you know, in the executive, such as what is happening at NYS, or whether we are talking about any other office. I think it's really a question of making institutions work. Because for many Kenyans, there was hope that that process by the PSC, because you've talked about the DPP, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and its failures, poor investigations by the arms tasked with that, but also the National Assembly. And I'm asking you this because you are members of the National Assembly. Simply because that whole thing was made such a big spectacle. It was broadcast on live TV. Yet it is still not enough to deter other people from feeling that, yeah, if I do this, probably it'll be something bad will happen to me.
You see, the role of a National Assembly is to make recommendations, and after they made recommendations, obviously they are not the prosecuting arm of government, they are not the investigative arm of government. They just bring certain matters into light, and more important is to make sure now whatever budget is allocated to government institutions is used properly. In this case, I must blame corruption to the highest level. There is no way, you know, for the people who operate IFMIS, are wired to the Department of Finance. So the Minister of Finance, top people in the Ministry of Finance must be aware of this. The ministry, the receiving ministry, the ministry dealing under which NYS lies under, the minister must be aware, the PS must be aware, and very many other senior government officials. And then the same people are wired to the DPP's office and to the body charged to fight against corruption, such that you find for 9 billion shillings to get lost. All those people have shared it, must have shared it. There is no way you leave anyone. And even if Parliament investigates, you are just recommending to the same
and that's a concern. That's a concern because, yes, we know that probably after this headline, the Parliamentary Accounts Committee could take up the matter again and decide to summon some of these people. But should we really hold our breath that, yes, PSC is handling the matter? Should we really even have any expectations that something could come out of any investigation by such a committee of Parliament?
I think we should. I think there is a way in which part of what I expect to be the result of this expose is that the National Assembly, like you rightly say, is going to begin to say, we make recommendations, but what else, given our mandate as the arm of government that is also supposed to exercise oversight, what else can we do? Because I do agree that it is important that we say we make recommendations, but there surely is a responsibility if you make recommendations and those recommendations are not followed, and much more serious if it looks like your very core role of oversight seems to be one that is almost being made negligible. So I do believe that we should expect that the National Assembly will rise and become a little more, if you like, emphatic in terms of bringing out the voice, the separation of powers. Because I think that what happens is that we have tended to glide to a culture where the distinction between the National Assembly and the executive has been blurred. And there is a sense in which if we ignore this kind of manifestation, then it would look as if we are going to be having an overlap. And we are going to be having a situation where it's just like dancing chairs in the National Assembly. So I'm looking forward to much more incisive action by the committees in the National Assembly.
But are we there yet that we can actually expect the committees of Parliament, given the kind of changes politically that we've seen in the past few weeks, the past few months, that even the Public Accounts Committee or the Public Investments Committee can actually really scrutinize what the executive is doing in this case? Because, yes, the people mentioned here definitely answer this directly to the executive. We're talking about CSs, PSs, the Director General of that institution. Do you think that given the handshake, the fact that a huge chunk of what we refer to as opposition MPs are now in support of what the government is doing, that yes, that oversight role could still result in something tangible?
I still believe Parliament's oversight role should remain, and the way government is structured currently is very tricky, such that
are you confident that as it stands right now, the National Assembly, that yes, that balance can be struck?
You know, you must have an opposition, a strong opposition in a country, to be able to deal with this sort of matter. I believe Parliament will do its best, but now this lies with the executive. The executive has to get serious this time, such that whoever is found guilty or there is overwhelming evidence against that person, the executive should be willing to let this person go, either resign voluntarily or be impeached by Parliament. Because the way things are structured, you find whatever the executive says now, Parliament will do. So after whatever recommendations and such and such a PS or a CS must be able to face the sack, it should be so, and I think the President should stand firm. I believe the President wants these funds protected, and it is his wish that he leaves this country better and protects theft of public funds. I don't believe he's personally a beneficiary. Therefore, he should not spare anyone below him. And the last time, you know, he made an effort to act, but it was claimed that ESCC, among others, misled him as to the facts. I think this time around, somebody must face the sack.
Yes. Are you confident that Parliament, as currently structured, is able to actually scrutinize such a matter, given the kind of political changes that have been there?
Yes, I am. I am confident, because I think one of the things that we need to understand is that the handshake was not really to say that we would tolerate or encourage impunity. My understanding of the handshake was to cool down the temperatures in such a way that the sort of restlessness and degree of anger or exclusion, or maybe just lack of closure of the manner in which the elections, finally wound up would be a challenge. And so I believe that if we are to look at the mandate of the National Assembly, and particularly given that those in the National Assembly represent the people, and they will themselves see the outcry and be faced directly with their role, I actually believe that they will rise to the challenge. And I think that the key thing is to ensure that those members in the committees are perhaps encouraged by the overall National Assembly to be a lot more serious in engaging in this.
Back to the issue at hand, away from the National Assembly. Of course, the story is actually on pages 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation. That's a full 2-page spread of what exactly is happening at the NYS. It's an expose. Looting NYS, the faces and phony firms behind 9 billion shilling looting spree at NYS. The next page, that's page 6 of the Daily Nation. 9 billion shilling loss stated in youth agency probe is exaggerated according to the PS. And beleaguered Public Service Principal Secretary Lillian Ombogo Omolo has sensationally accused Kenya's spy master Philip Kameru of grossly exaggerating the amount suspected to have been lost in that corruption scandal at the NYS. She says the amount being investigated is 900 million shillings, not 9 billion shillings. But either way, 900 million shillings is
whatever
not
amount.
Whatever amount it is.
Serious.
This is not little money, surely. But now, is it time that we relook at NYS, the structure of NYS, and what exactly it is we are hoping to do with it? Because it appears, and this is just a matter of 1, 2, 3 years, that it has become a center for looting. People have actually found out that probably it's the easiest way to steal public funds.
In fact, if it is, if they are admitting that 900 billion is lost, that's
Million,
the reason they should 900 million, sorry. This is the reason they should resign. Even before an investigation, even 1 shilling should not be lost, should be accounted for. Therefore, if there is such an admission, then the PSS and the CSS should resign and probably face prosecution and end up in jail.
Yeah.
It's a very serious matter that even they can afford to admit that they are unable to account for some of the monies. I believe from the way government system is structured and the IFMIS, you can be able to know who you paid what and what did they supply and was it worth it. It's a very simple investigation.
Yes.
And I think this time round the heads should roll.
Yes. Professor, do you think it's time that we relook at what exactly NYS was intended for, and probably how we approach this whole issue about this institution that was intended to actually help the young people, but now probably it's just helping a few people become richer?
I certainly think that it is time that we relook this, and I actually do believe that it is one of the core areas that the committees, relevant committees in the National Assembly can engage, because it seems that we might be assuming that the manner in which the NYS was structured in its original objective was intended to be for public good, but it is possible that in its own structural arrangement and the kind of undertakings and understanding that those who manage these affairs have, it is a different outfit. So I actually believe that the manner in which officers in government work, there is usually a very clear policy arrangement and a protocol, and it's just not possible that you would be having this happening again and again unless there was a strong underlying basis. So it is time to relook.
Because given the kind of budget that budgetary allocation that goes to NYS, it's probably one of the biggest single units that the government is running directly. Do you think that probably it is time to detach the NYS from direct government connection and probably have it run separately? That probably that would help, because it appears when such huge amounts are involved in any government project, then it becomes easier for fraudsters to actually dip in their fingers.
First and foremost, the initial purpose of NYS should be able to benefit the youth of this country. And there must be trainings of such nature, such that these Kenyans will be very useful to the country in terms of mechanics, the people who do wiring of different types, electricians. You know, this is also where you prepare people to become policemen, to join the army, and to make use of people who otherwise would not have been useful to the country and will have ended up to crime. So the mandate of NYS is very good. And it's, you know, if one time I worked in the Ministry of Youth and Sports, I'm aware of what happens there, and is a very serious department. It is possible that it can be detached, but issue of corruption is a mindset, and that is someone who has decided to loot public funds, knowing very well whatever they are being paid for, they have not given the equivalent value of the same. And that's a criminal. You know, that's somebody who should be prosecuted and you know, and punished, so that there is deterrence, so that others don't do it. So I think we need to monitor the institution as a parliament more closely, such that public funds are accounted for. So long as they can account for the money, that's okay. But when they cannot account for it, and when whatever was done, you know, is not seen, then there's a problem. And I want to say that we also need, as a country, to feel the effects of those who attend the NYS, even at the villages, so that we can see somebody's life has been transformed. Otherwise, we need to look at why do we allocate so much money as a parliament to NYS? Why does the executive propose? Because you see, the budget is a tool of the executive. When the executive proposes this, there's executive follow-up to make sure that Kenyans get value for the money.
Yes, and because for a government to actually undertake such a huge project, it means it's deep in the heart of what the government intends to do. 9 billion shillings disappearing within one institution is something else. Probably it is time to re-look at how that structure is run. We have a police service that is run separately. We have a military unit that's run separately, away from probably how the government day-to-day government operations. Probably that's the same way that NYS should go. Probably that would be managed better. Just thinking, is it?
Yes, I certainly believe that the key is to get a lot more details in terms of how the NYS is run. I think there is a way in which we make assumptions, and because when we think about the youth and we think about the challenge that is presented by the large population that is unemployed, everybody just sort of says, okay, this will be the answer. But I really believe that given what has happened, not just once but twice, it is useful, before we even establish exactly what happened, that we begin to ask ourselves what really, structurally, administratively, are the lessons that we learn in terms of the way how the NYS operates.
Yes, it may be a brilliant idea, that whole NYS project, but if at all Kenyans feel that every year we have to go back to NYS and just count how much money has been stolen through that, however good an idea it is, Kenyans will start feeling like probably we do not need this.
No, NYS is very important, and it's only that NYS has been exposed. You have just talked about the military, you have just talked about the police, and many other government departments, you know, the roads. There are many areas, you know, governments spends a lot of money. So it means we need to be more serious on how we monitor